Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ana Santiago, Resident Services Administrator with CMHA. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on interview success. We're excited to have Ms. Sharia Bain, Workforce Development Manager with a Step Forward, with us as our presenter. Ms. Bain will share practical tips and strategies to help you feel more confident, prepared, and successful during the interview process. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Sharia Bain.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sharia Bien, Community Service Coordinator and Employment Specialist at Step Forward. It's a pleasure to be with you today to discuss interviewing techniques. Yes, I don't see the slides on the screen. Okay. So let's talk about effective interviewing techniques. We know that we're all looking and searching for employment at this time. Um, we are involved in a recession, but there are job opportunities out there. And we would encourage everyone to apply for positions. There are part-time positions, seasonal positions, full-time positions, temporary positions that are open and available. And we really want to make sure that we're prepared to apply for these unique opportunities. So the reason why we're applying is because we need a job. Maybe we need a job because to meet financial obligations. Uh, we need a job to be involved in our community, to get involved and be busy. We need positions and jobs to fulfill and cover some gaps that we may have in our employment history that is on our resume. So we would like to, it's important to turn opportunities into employment. So let's take a pause and think about what we see when we're applying for job opportunities. You may see a sign in the window that says, "Now hiring, join our team." And that's great that there are opportunities available. But let's pause and assess the opportunity. What should we do first when we see that sign in the window, or we see that ad on Indeed.com, or we see that ad about a job fair event that is happening on Facebook or some other website or social media outlet? So let's assess the opportunity first. And then if you happen to see an opportunity where you can walk in and apply, which is very rare today, but if you see an opportunity in a job posting on the window, on the door of a business, or if you're attending a job fair, let's start by entering and introducing ourselves to that employer. But before we do that, it's important to understand that when we introduce ourselves to the employer, that is the first impression of you to the employer. So we don't want to walk into a business and not be presentable. So we still want to make sure that our attire is business casual or business attire. We want to make sure that our presentation is put together, meaning that we have a clean cut presentation. Um, we want to make sure that we're well groomed. All of those things are very important. So once you go in and introduce yourself and that you're a job seeker and you're interested in the job opportunity, that's really great because you have a first to first meeting, the first meeting that you have with the employer, which is fantastic because employers remember the first impression. They remember your face and connect the face to the name. Now, once you've introduced yourself and you said, "My name is Jim Jones or Ms. Johnson, I'm interested in the job opportunity," the employer usually will probably tell the job seeker how to apply for the open position, which is usually go to the website or there's a link to apply, and then that's when you apply for the jobs. I encourage everyone to do their research on the company. You need to know something about the company. This is very important. So if you're interested in the job and you've met the employer and everything seems cool. The first presentation of you walking in went very well. Then let's do your research. Now, back in the day, back in my day, the way that I did research is at the local library. And believe it or not, there were books, sort of like encyclopedias, about current information about the companies in the greater Cleveland area. And I would take out that book and I would read and review that. But luckily, you guys don't have to do that. Why? Because we have the internet. And we can use the internet to do our research. We can find out new things that are happening with the company, if they have a new division opening up, if they have goals that they're trying to meet. There's always current and new information on the internet. So it's important to research the company. And we're going to cover more about that in the interviewing skills, why that is important. So you apply for open positions, and then because you've already met the employer, let's start to prepare for a job interview. Because now that you've met them and they have connected your name with your physical presentation, now it's time to really think about preparing ourselves. So begin to highlight your qualifications. And it's important to do that because it prepares you for the job interview. And then after the job interview, we move on to our follow up. But let's take a couple steps back and let's talk about the job interview process. Let's talk about the do's and don'ts of interviewing. So, of course, you want to research the company. Those are the do's. You want to arrive 10 to 15 minutes early, which is very important. You know, traffic in Cleveland can get hectic. We're dealing with closures right now, construction issues, and recently weather. We've been having some windy and rainy weather. So it's very important to make sure that we arrive 10 to 15 minutes early. You want to maintain good eye contact with the employer. Now, this is not a competition. We don't want to stare down the employer. We don't want to compete and see who can make the first blink. It's not that kind of scenario, but we do want to give them really good eye contact. It's important to listen carefully and clearly when you're communicating with them and engaged in the conversation. Make sure you bring extra copies of your resume. That's very important. That shows that you're prepared for the process. And very important is to ask for the job. Oftentimes, there's an hour interview with the employer and they take you around to the departments and they show you the work environment and where you're going to be working. Sometimes they introduce you to some staff members, and at the end of it all, the employer doesn't really know if you're interested in the job. So before you leave, let's make it clear to the employer that you're very interested. And then within 24 hours, you want to send the employer a thank you note or a thank you email. So in order to do that, you have to gather the employer's information. Oftentimes, the person who contacted you for the interview is not the person who is conducting the interview. So it's important to collect this information so it allows you to do your follow-up. So, in reverse, don't be late for your job interview. Do not be late because it is the first representation of you. What are the employers going to think if you arrive late to your job interview? They're going to think that you're not reliable, and we definitely don't want them to think that that's happening. Make sure that you always speak positively about your former bosses, your former managers, and your coworkers. Never speak in negative tone, and never give them negative information. Be sure to not interrupt the employer while they're speaking. That's very important. Definitely don't use your cell phone while you're in an interview. In fact, I recommend that you place your cell phone in your bag, maybe turn it off, leave it in the car. It's not needed for your job interview. So let's uh take the technology and put that away. Um it's important not to give vague and dishonest answers. If you're applying for a clerical position and on your resume and in your job application, it says that you are knowledgeable with Microsoft Excel, and then in that interview process, the employers are asking you about Excel, then they expect you to give them concrete examples of that skill. So it's important to not be vague and to be honest in terms of your skills and your abilities and what you know how to do. And don't forget to prepare examples. When they ask you questions, provide prepared examples of your work. Now, people say, how can you do that? And you don't know what they're asking you. If you have the job description or the posting, usually it has some information on there about what they're looking for. There are certain skills that really stand out, and those are the skills that you want to hold on to and provide information about in your job interview. Never focus on salary and benefits. At this point, it's not important. Unless they tell you to come on board, we would like for you to start on Monday. Then there's no need to discuss the salary and benefits. We don't discuss that until you're hired for the position. Uh, so let's talk about the 5 steps of the interview process. The first step is the icebreaker or greeting. That's when you first meet the employer, you shake and exchange uh, uh, greetings, you shake hands, and then at that time, it's time to have a small talk conversation. Usually, you can engage with the employer in small talk by looking at your environment. If the restaurant is really clean and you're having a job interview in the area where they service their customers, you can mention how clean and how nice the restaurant is. If it's in the employer's office, you can talk about their degrees and their accomplishments. If they have their degrees and certificates on the wall or on their desk. Just engage in small talk. I have some of my customers that say that they talk about the sports here in Cleveland. They may talk about the Cleveland Browns or the Cavaliers or the Cleveland Indians, and that opens up a conversation in small talk. Then once you move on from that, that's where the questions probably start, and employers start asking you questions about your abilities, your skills, and your work experience. Now, you need to know yourself. This is very important to know your skills and your qualifications and what you have to offer the employer. So I often recommend that we identify our skill sets early on before we have the job interview. And that can occur also in the mock interview process. Um, Also, it's important to bring up accomplishments that you have and activities that you were involved in, and also your future goals. A lot of employers will ask questions about your 5-year goal or your 10-year goal, your career goal. So let's prepare a statement for that as well. So the interview preparation. Still talking about the prep part because when you have the prep part completed, you feel so confident in your job interview. You're ready because first of all, you've completed the application, you've submitted the resume, and if they've selected you to move on through the process, that means that what they have on paper for you sounds really great. And because the skills match and the qualifications match, then you're halfway through the interview process, believe it or not. So there's 4 categories that we're going to discuss in the interview preparation. One is situational knowledge, which is very important. That's where is the interview? Where is it located? Um, It's important to know that because oftentimes we don't have, it's important to have that information beforehand. Think of university hospitals. University hospitals is a huge hospital. Um, you don't know where your interview is going to be unless they provide you that information. And or if you're being interviewed in a hotel, you don't know if you're going to have the interview in the dining area with the interviewer, maybe a separate address than the address that you see on the periodicals or on websites. So be sure to validate the location and where the interview is taking place. Also, you want to make sure that you have the information about who is conducting the job interview. So it's important to have the person's name. That covers situational knowledge. Now let's go into physical preparation. Um, it's important to get plenty of rest before your job interview. And I know, hey, you're nervous. It could be that you haven't had a job interview in a while. It could be that you haven't had a job interview before. And I know you can be nervous and tend not to get the best sleep the day before your job interview, but it's important to get rest, even if that means getting into bed an hour or two early. That's important. The mental preparation, knowledge of the company is very important. So this is what you know, knowledge wise. It's also important to practice interviewing techniques. Now, we don't practice for perfection. Perfection does not exist. It just doesn't. So we don't practice for perfection. We practice for comfort. So do you feel comfortable throughout the process? That's why we practice. And that's where the actual mock interviews come into play. The mock interviews should be there to help you feel comfortable, so you don't feel anxious. And so those nervous things that we do, like tap our leg and shake our hands, those things can be identified early on before the actual interview. And then you feel more confident when you know that you have some of those things under control. So it's important to schedule a mock interview and to practice those interview questions, not for perfection, for comfort, so that you feel more comfortable during the process. Also, the written preparation, you want to make sure that you bring a resume and also a list of references. That's still a thing, to bring the list of references. So have that prepared as well. Now, who should be your reference? Your reference should be someone that knows you well and knows your work ethic. So a family member who doesn't know how well you work with others is not really a good reference. Maybe a former coworker or a former supervisor who can vouch for your skills, your qualifications, and your work experience, and vouch for how well you perform the job. It's very important. Also, make sure that you ask questions and take notes during the interview. Now, I know some people say, I am uncomfortable with taking notes because I am so focused on the job interview and so focused on answering the interview questions. And I'm listening clearly, and I want to make sure that I receive the information so that I can follow up. And to throw in pencil and paper during that process, for some people, it doesn't work, and that's fine. But it's very important to ask questions after your job interview. So I just want to talk about one fun fact of interviewing. There's a formula for successful employment in interviews, and that is preparation plus skills plus attitude equals success. So although if you have all of those things, then you're closer to obtaining the job. Now, I didn't talk about much about attitude, but let's take a deeper dive into attitude. Attitude involves smiling, It involves using the polite words in your job interview, being courteous, and that starts early on when you walk into the employer's place of business. How you present yourself to the receptionist or to the manager, all of those things are very important. Um, how you treat them is how you will treat their customers, their patrons, how you would treat their vendors. If you're working in an environment where you're going to work with vendors, so let your light shine through and be courteous and kind and have a positive attitude. Now, people say, okay, I do all of this in a job interview, but what are the employers looking for? I am going to tell you that this is something, sort of a mantra that I have followed throughout my whole career, and I never forget it. That people get hired and you can convince an employer to hire you if you remember the how to's. The how to's is how are you going to help the employer in their business? So the how to includes how to make or save the company money. If you worked in a previous employment with a previous employer and you had an opportunity to save the company money, maybe you had a new vendor that they can connect with where their prices were much lower than the vendor they were currently using. Share that information with the employer. Share how you've helped the company save money. Also, save time. If there were efficient processes and you with your previous employer where you're able to do your work more efficiently, share that process in your job interview and explain to that interviewer how you were able to save the company time. Also, how to enhance the company's image. Maybe there was a greeting that you utilized with your previous employer that the patrons really loved. And maybe that can be implemented into your next role. So share with the employer how you were able to enhance the company's image. And finally, to provide the company with peace of mind. That's where the reliability comes to play. That means that you're saying to the employer, hey, if you decide to select me for the position, you will have total peace of mind, meaning that there's no discussion with me about being on time to work or completing the task or getting along with people. Those kinds of things involve peace of mind. Um, I often used to say to an employer that in your absence, I can assure you that the business will run efficiently. The customers and patrons will be happy and satisfied just as if you were here. That's total peace of mind. So let's talk about the skill sets, the types of skills. There are three different types of skills. Technical skills are those skills that we were trained to do. We don't wake up and know how to drive a tow motor or a forklift. We were trained to do those things. So let's talk about those technical skills that are closely related to the position. An example, if you're an STNA, you may have to document medication passes, maybe, or you may have to document medication reminders, things of that sort. Those are things that we're taught to do. We don't wake up knowing how to chart medical information. And transferable skills are those skills that transfer from one job to the next. Those are things like teamwork, problem solving skills, communication skills, customer service skills. And then we have those personal skills. Those personal skills are those skills that we were taught when we were young, when we're taught to always tell the truth, always be honest. Things like taking initiative to get things done. Those are our personable skills. So all of these traits and skills are what you're going to discuss with the employer. That's why it's so important to know what you know how to do and what those skills are, because you have to talk about those skills to the employer. They want to hear about all those skills that are related to the position, and it qualifies you for the role. So all of those things are very crucial. Now, after you talk about your skill set, sometimes an employer may throw in a behavioral question. Behavioral questions are the what if questions in a job interview. And an example of that is, what would you do if a customer came in and they were irate about the services they received? Okay, that's the if situation and scenario. So in those type of questions, especially if you're working with the public or if you're working in a team environment, those behavioral questions require the STAR technique, the STAR method technique, where you have to provide the employer sort of a story of a previous experience that you've had in your previous employment with a previous employer, and you're explaining to them in detail, but not a lot of great detail, how you've handled a situation. So, first, you have to explain the situation and describe the situation, problem, or the issue that you were encountered with, which is what I've just provided. The scenario that a customer comes in and they're angry or irate about a service. The next thing you would have to do is describe the task and responsibilities you took to help solve the problem. Okay. So those are the hands-on details. Maybe you review the service that was provided. You're reviewing the notes that were entered, or you're reviewing a requisition or some process. Maybe you are taking a look at their receipt or the information that they brought in, to kind of review the information. Okay, the next step is let's take action. Because the customer is angry, they're irate, and they're upset. And what's important to a business owner or to an employer? Their patrons and their customers. Why? Because customers are repeat business. And when they're being serviced well, they will return for an additional service. When they're not treated well, they tend to find another company to have to deal with their business. So, what are the action steps that you took to effectively resolve the solution? Okay. Now, at the end of the process, the result has to be a positive situation, meaning that you resolve the issue and the customer is pleased that the information has been processed and resolved, and there's a positive outcome at the end. That's very important. Now, so be prepared for the behavioral interview question and how to handle the behavioral interview question by providing the STAR method technique: situation, task, action, and result. Now, that requires some thinking. That requires a mock interview. That requires thinking about the processes from your previous employer. It involves remembering and sort of recanting what happened with your previous employer so that you can provide a concrete, solid example to that employer. Okay, so preparation is very important in interviewing. I often remind individuals that no two job interviews or three job interviews are the same. It's possible that you may walk into an employer's office and they may take you downstairs to the coffee shop and you're going to have your interview in the coffee shop. I've had that happen to me. Um, so it was very different, but you have to prepare for those scenarios. So I had a few dollars in my pocket for coffee so that we can have a conversation over coffee or tea. And it is an awkward moment, but you have to turn that awkward moment into success and not let that hinder you or prevent you from having a really good conversation with the employer and having a positive outcome at the end. So Those things will happen. I've had scenarios where I've walked into an office and the interviewer have not arrived yet. Okay. So the interviewer was late for the job interview. Okay. So again, you don't want to go sit there and be impatient and go, oh, I have things to do. You don't want to say that or imply that you're tired of waiting. Those kind of mishaps will happen because guess what? Interviewers are people too, and things do happen. So, what do we do in that situation? If you have something to read, you can pull something from your bag to read during while you wait. If they have information in the lobby, in the office, on the tables, you can pull some of their periodicals, some information from their tables. You can review that. But you know what else you could do? You could go over those interview questions and you can go over some of your sample responses if you have them with you to kind of do another short preparation before your interview begins. And be positive when that employer shows up late for their job interview. Say, hey, it's okay, no problem. I've had a time to review some information that I brought with me, or it gave me an opportunity to catch up on a few things. Hey, things do happen, and let's move on from that. Okay, so always be prepared throughout the interview process. So let's move on to the next, where it says basic interview questions. Every job seeker should be ready to answer. These are the basic interview questions. Tell me about yourself. Why are you interested in the position here? What are your strengths? As well as what are your weaknesses? What is the challenge you have to overcome if you're facing challenges right now? And it's not a good idea to say, I don't have any challenges because that doesn't provide the employer with information. We all have challenges, whether we're working or not working. There's always some kind of obstacle that we have to overcome. And employers receive your answer, they receive information in your answer, and they understand your process when you're faced with challenges. Because guess what? At work, there are going to be challenges. And they would like to know that you have a reasonable, practical way of overcoming those challenges. They may ask you, why should I hire you? Let's talk about why it's important to give them reasons to hire you. You're the best candidate for the job based upon A, B, and C. Your qualification, your skill set, you would be an asset. There's lots of information you can provide there. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? That's very important because they want to know where you're going. Also, it provides them with information to find out if you're promotable, if you're willing to advance in your career. They may possibly have opportunities in the future in 5 years because oftentimes we don't have the information that the company has. They may be thinking of opening a new call center in Twinsburg or in Euclid, Ohio. Um, and they're thinking already that if you provide them with information about your 5-year goal and it connects to their goal, this could be a possible candidate that we can hire today and possibly be on board for the next 5 years or more. And that's important to an employer because it saves them time, it saves them money. They're investing in you, and those are all good things. They may ask you to describe a time you worked on a team. Okay, that way they can gain some information about your team skills, and also they can determine whether or not you have leadership skills based upon how you answer the question. So let's go back up to the what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. Oftentimes, it's difficult to talk about weaknesses. The reason why employers ask about weaknesses is because they want to know how you overcome them. It's never proper to say, I don't have any weaknesses. Because you mentioned earlier today that perfection does not exist and there are no perfect people. Okay. It just doesn't exist. So we all have weaknesses. Okay. So it's important to one, tell the employer what your weakness is, and two, explain to the employer what you're doing or what you have done to overcome those weaknesses. Um, so that's very important. For example, if your weakness is I get nervous speaking in front of a group of people, it makes me very nervous. Maybe to overcome that weakness, you join a local Toastmasters group, a group to provide information and training on how to present in front of a group. Maybe you've put yourself out there so that you can expose yourself where you're being more involved in speaking and engaging in conversations with groups of people. That's another way to develop your skill. It doesn't have to be a work experience situation. It could be a volunteer experience. If you're involved in your community, let's say you're involved with a group of people who are involved in cleaning up the neighborhood. I see those groups all the time. Shout out to Collinwood, the Collinwood community, and other communities who have groups of residents and groups of neighborhoods and community members that get out and volunteer to clean up, excuse me, clean up their neighborhoods. So, talking with groups of people, having conversations with group of people, coming up with itineraries, things of that sort will help you develop that skill. And employers want to know what you do to overcome that. And I know that that is a struggle. Talking about weaknesses is a struggle, but we have to be comfortable with discussing that with an employer. Um, Another thing that's very important to mention is if your resume doesn't quite matches the job description. I've seen that before. Let me give you an example of that. I oftentimes meet with clients who have had positions and jobs, employment opportunities in different fields of work, but they've gone on to school and they no longer want those jobs because they've mastered those jobs, meaning that they have so much work experience in those areas and they just kind of want to try a new career and focus on a new career path. So their resume doesn't really reflect the job description. However, their training might. Okay. So in that scenario, in the interview, you do want to talk a little bit about those transferable skills from those positions that relate to the new job opportunity. Um, Maybe in your previous employers, you have to be very organized and detailed due to the type of work you've done in the past. Well, if you're, for example, working in the healthcare field, those skills are still required. You have to be detail oriented because we don't want to make mistakes, medication errors. We don't want to make mistakes on charts and records. And we have to be very organized when we perform our work because there are certain policies and processes that we have to follow when we greet and meet with patients. Depending on the care that they need, there are certain protocols that we all have to follow. So focus on the transferable skills. Don't focus on the skills that's related directly to your past work experience. Let's focus on the transferable skills and those skills that transfer from one position into another position or into a career. Another thing that you can focus on is focus on your education. Talk about the courses that you have taken. Talk about the activities that were involved in your training. Talk about if you're going on a different tasks that you've had to do throughout your training. Let's talk about that and talk about those subjects that really stood out for you. that really stuck with you. And let's talk about those subjects that are closely related to the new career path that you're on. And let's talk about questions to ask the interviewer as well. Because at the end of the day, an interview is a two-way conversation and a two-way interview. You're interviewing the employer as well. Now they are interviewing you for the position that is available, but you need information as well because you want to make sure that you're making the right decision, right? So you want to ask questions. You want to ask the employer, what would a typical day be like? If I'm selected for the position, what is it like? What is the role like on a day-to-day basis? You may want to ask about their biggest challenges there at the company or in a department. What are the challenges of the role? I'll call that pain points. A pain point is a weakness that an employer has and need to hire someone who has a strength in that area so that will no longer be a weakness. Let me give you an example of that. We all have to pay our bills through the utility company, gas, light bill. It can get frustrating, when you're paying your bill. If you have to make a phone call or speak with someone, what do we get a lot of times? Automated conversations. And we're trying to get to a person to explain the situation, to explain the problem or the scenario. Okay, so for some employers, that may be a pain uh, point or a pain scenario that they have to work through is that they don't have good customer service. Maybe you could talk up in your interview how you've had experiences, speaking with or working through problems with customers. Maybe you could talk about that, and then that would not eliminate the pain point, but provide some strengths in that area. So these are some other questions that you can ask the interviewer. You want to ask about opportunities for advancement, training, and professional development. That's very important because that really lets the employer know that you're interested in moving up into a higher position or you're interested in advancement opportunities. The next, you want to talk about powerful words that can land you in the position. Providing information like I'm passionate about. Talk about your assets and how you would be an asset to the company. Talk about how well you communicate. Talk about the fact that you're an adaptable learner because the world changes. Just in technology alone, you know, it changes. And we can't really get stuck in our ways in the way things used to be because the world is revolving, workplaces are revolving, how we do things is constantly revolving. So we want to let the employer know that we are an adaptable learner and we can sort of roll with the changes, learn new skills. So we don't want to be stuck in our ways. And then after the interview, and if you answered all the questions, you provide them with your strengths and your weaknesses and how you're going to be a great asset and how you're the person who fits the position because of your great attitude, your positivity, you're willing to learn, the fact that you're reliable and that you have the skill set to perform the work. And once you've done all of that, at the end of the interview, we want to talk about gratitude for the position. You always want to say thank you to the employer for the job interview. That's very important because it's possible that they may have selected you out of 300 job candidates. That's very possible, especially in the times that we're in now. So you want to say thank you for the job interview. Thank you for taking the time to interview me for the position. Talk about what you talk about, what you discussed in the interview, and what stands out for you and how you're really interested in the job and how your qualifications best fit the position. So that's where you highlight key skills and how you're a great fit for that role. And reaffirming your interest for the job. Because remember, after the interview, the employers have no idea if you're still interested. So you want to, again, make sure that they understand that you're very interested in the position. And it's always good to invite the next steps, meaning that reiterate that you're still interested in the position. Always talk about your contact information and how they're able to reach you. Provide them, make sure that that information is readily available to them. And you can also ask who makes the next move in terms of follow up. Do you follow up with the person who's interviewed you, or is there another person that you need to connect with to follow up regarding the position? And just remember that it's important to follow up with a thank you note or a thank you email at the end of the interview within 24 hours. You should have that ready. And it shouldn't be just a quick thank you note. It should be thank you. This was stood out in the interview. This is what interested me. It was a pleasure to meet so and so when we did the tour. It was very exciting to learn about the new aspects of the job that they're planning to implement. It was fascinating to learn about the new building that they're building, which will house this department and that department. That shows that you were listening, you were attentive, that you're taking information back because you remembered the conversation that you had. And it's important also to keep records of your job interview, who you interview with, the person's contact information, so that you can follow up. And also at the end of the interview, after you've said your goodbyes with the employer and the interview is over, it's very important to evaluate your performance. Okay. Talk about the difficulties that you've had in the interview, meaning which questions were difficult to answer. Because we want to make sure that we hone in on the difficulties so that we can not make those perfect, but make those answers more concrete, more solid, and so that the next time you feel what? More comfortable answering the questions. That's the key. Um, Also, so hey, you've had your interview. Sometimes an interview can be one or two interviews. Sometimes it could be more interviews before they select you for the actual position. So let's say, hey, you've done all the things. You've had a great interview, you've done a follow-up, and you've gotten a call that you've received the position, that you are the person that's selected for the role, whether it be a call or an email. Hey, you've gotten the job. And that was the whole purpose of the interview process, the mock interviews, and also following up with the employer was to obtain the position. So you're starting strong in your new role. And we're excited. And it's time to celebrate, right? Yeah. It's time to celebrate and to let your family members know and your friends know that, hey, you're working, which is fantastic. But after the celebration and you're starting and strong in your new role, there's some things that we still have to do. And employers sometimes don't discuss the onboarding process in great detail. There's some documentation that you have to submit, some paperwork, some requirements that you have to meet before you actually have a start date. Okay. So we need to make sure that we follow up with those things. We need to confirm a start date and a schedule. Where is where am I supposed to report for the new position? Where is it located? What time do I have to be there? Then once you get there, it's important to understand and review the policies and the company's expectations. Oftentimes when you start a new job, they give you some kind of handbook, excuse me, employee handbook to review. It's important to review those policies, understand them, Also, when you start a new role, let's focus on building positive relationships with everyone that works there. Okay. Let's be polite and kind and say thank you. And this sort of your guide when you start a new job. Sure, your manager may show you the ropes, so to speak, but those co-workers are the ones who provide you with the ins and outs of the task and how to communicate with their patrons. They sort of give you the do's and the don'ts on the job, so to speak. So it is very important to build those positive relationships and make sure that you're communicating with everyone when you start your new position. And the focus also should be to learn and develop new skills while you're there. Okay. And also to share what you know, because maybe you have information that your team could benefit from. Okay. So it's an exchange of knowledge. Also, while you're there, maintain a professional and a positive attitude always. And this is your opportunity to level up. Okay. Meaning that you got your feet in the door, you're starting your new role, you're learning new skills, you're meeting new coworkers, and there's some anxiety and nervousness involved with that because they're new, everything's new and fresh. But at the same time, let's make sure that we focus on leveling up. That means let's look at opportunities for advancement once you learn those new skills. Make sure that the employer understands that you're the person that's interested in promotional opportunities. And I like to use the word level up because CMHA uses that term level up. So you've gotten the new position and the new role, and that's great. But once you got your feet in the door, we're going to focus on future plans and future goals while you're there. And so that's why interviewing techniques is so important because it can lead you to the position if you understand how to answer the questions. So are there any questions? Mhm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me. My information is in the chat as I am keying it now. Thank you so much. I appreciate. Oh, sorry about that. I appreciate being able to present to you.